In this video, we'll look at concepts related to the drag and drop feature to help you in implementing it in your programs. After this video, you'll be able to describe the usage of the drag and drop feature, describe drag and drop as used in a simple list, between lists, and between a Genero program and another Genero program, or between Genero program and a non-Genero program. You'll also be able to recognize and use drag and drop interaction blocks in the display array statement, and recognize and use methods from the UI DragDrop class. So as you may know, the drag and drop feature is new to the BDL 230 release. It allows the user to select an item from one list and drag it with a mouse to another place in the list or to a different list, as you can see on the screen here. There are several ways you can implement drag and drop in your programs. The first way is for a user to be able to drag and drop an item into the same list, so to reposition or reorder a list by dragging and dropping a row. On the left-hand side, you can see this drag drop implemented in this display array using a table container in the form. On the right-hand side, you can see we're using a tree view container. So you can use either a table or a tree view container when working with drag and drop. A second way that drag and drop can be used is between lists. As you can see on the left, we have two table containers and two display array statements. The user can drag from one list to another list by selecting one or many rows. On the right side, you see the example of using a table container and a tree view container. So the user can take items from one list and move them over to position in the second list. A third way that drag and drop can be implemented is between Genero and another Genero program, or between Genero and a non-Genero program. So notice in this example, we're taking a value from this Genero program, a piece of data, this object, and we're dragging it over to Microsoft Outlook, a mail program. Now where we are dropping it to accepts the drop, and the MIME type that it's passed in, you can see, is a text/plain MIME type. And since that's accepted by this field in Microsoft Outlook, we're able to drag and drop it there. Same thing would be true for dragging and dropping to Excel or any other outside program that will accept the type of data that you are dropping. And the same is true if you were to drag over to a Genero program. You could accept that object if you were accepting that type of data into your field or location in the list. So the overall way to implement drag and drop, or the big picture areas to think about, are first you're going to need a drag drop object. Now the drag drop object is going to be what the user has selected and is dragging, so that becomes the drag object. You need a table or tree view defined in order to manage the display array. So remember, we're going to display an array of data to an object on the form that's going to be either a table container or a tree view container. We're going to need to define the display array statements or dialogues, and if there are more than one, we would want to nest those into an overall dialog program so that they can both be active at the same time. We call that a multiple dialog program. Then we would need to define within the display array what are the things that are going to happen as the user tries to drag and drop the objects. These interaction blocks, on drag start, on drag finished, on drag enter, on drag over, and on drop, are all triggered at various times within the display array, allowing you to manage what happens with that object that's being dragged or dropped. We'll also see, or you'll also be using, methods from the UI DragDrop class that allow you to more easily and with more functionality and less coding for you, use these methods to implement various behaviors within the drag drop feature. So when we looked at those interaction blocks or mentioned those interaction blocks, something to keep in mind is what their purpose is. So as we start to look at some code, you'll see in the display array that these interaction blocks are used and are triggered at particular times, allowing you to manage what happens as the user works with within the display array. The onDrag start is triggered when the user starts to drag from the source list. OnDrag enter is triggered when the user enters the drop target list. So if we were thinking about a particular list, as the user selects a item of data and begins to drag it, the drag start has begun. As they're in that same display array, the onDrag enter may also be triggered. As they move to the other display array, the onDrag enter for that display array would be triggered. Okay, so when we're entering the target list. OnDrag over is optional, and it depends on the target row of the drop target. So in other words, on drag over, we can check to see what row are they over, or what position are they in, and is this an acceptable place to drop this information. You see this being used when working with a tree view, because you might want to limit the user from being able to drop within only to be able to drop within folders or branches of that tree and not at individual nodes. The onDrop is triggered when the user releases the mouse over the target list, so when they drop. And onDrag finished is triggered from the source list where the drag object came from, triggered from the source list when the user releases the mouse over the target list. Let's take a look at an example of working in drag and drop and see how these interaction blocks work. Here's an example of an application where I've gone ahead and added some display statements in the display array within each of the interaction blocks that this is using to manage the drag and drop. And what I just want you to look at is over here on the left-hand side at the bottom, you'll see the output. So let's just go ahead and clear that output first and make it a little bigger. Now as I run this program, as I select something from the left, notice that the interaction blocks that have been triggered are the onDrag start from the left side in the left display array and the onDrag enter. In other words, it's currently entered into this left side, and there's some code indicating that it cannot have a drop on the left side, so it's not going to allow that. Now as I move that to the right, notice that the onDrag enter in the right display array, the right dialog is triggered, and as I drop it, the onDrop for the right side was triggered, and the onDrag finished for the left side was triggered. As we move it, we are removing from the left list an item and adding it to the right list. So we are going to use these control blocks, these interaction blocks, to manage when that happens. So if the user grabs something and moves it over here and does not drop it, then the onDrop is not triggered. We can move it back over here and let go, and the onDrag finished for the left side is again triggered. So if we look at the code for that, let's just look at one of the display arrays. The display arrays are housed in an overall dialog statement because they're both open enabled at the same time. And the onDrag start, the onDrag finish, the onDrag enter, the onDrop, all of these are providing the places for the code where this needs to occur. So the onDrop is going to be where we are actually inserting a row to one array and deleting a row from the other array. And we see here that the onDrag enter is going to go ahead and check to see where the drag source is from, and if it's from the left side, the left array, we're going to set the operation to null. In other words, not let the user put that row somewhere else in the list. There's a video available as well that shows you how to implement this in more detail, but important to understand how these control blocks or interaction blocks are used within the display array statement. It's also helpful to know about the drag-drop methods that are available to help you implement your drag-drop feature. There are some basic methods such as drop internal, which has all the functionality for performing the built-in drop when the target is the source list or tree. In other words, when you want to allow the user to move a dragged object within the same list, you can use drop internal to manage the built-in drop of that, repositioning it into the list. Set feedback allows you to identify the sort of visual appearance of what's possible with that particular object. So for example, if it's set to insert, then they'll see the line showing them where that new row will be inserted. There are also positioning helpers, in other words, those that help you understand where the user is, has positioned the object. So getLocationParent returns the parent node if the mouse is pointing to a row during the drop. You can get the location parent of that row where they are hovering. And getLocationRow, you can return the value of the actual row where they're hovering. There are also some operational methods that are helpful to know about. You can allow the user to either copy or move an object from a list, and you can determine whether or not that operation is valid or not, or is accepted. You can use get operation, specifying it to null if you don't want the drop to be allowed in that list, that sort of a thing. You can also set the operation, so you might set the operation to be a copy versus a move, for example. There's also a set of methods around MIME type, and MIME type is the identifier of the type of content in a message. So within the object being dragged, we can identify the MIME type of that so that the Genero program or other programs can interpret what that type of object is, and then you can check the MIME type on something being dragged over or potential drop over so that you can see if it's something that your list will accept or not. So you'll see things here like get selected MIME type, so you can know what the MIME type is of the previously selected drag object. You can select the MIME type, so you can actually get the value of that. Set the MIME type, so you can identify for where it's headed, what type of content this is. And then you get buffer and set buffer allow you to use the buffer of where that MIME type information is located so that you can use it elsewhere. So the UI drag drop methods, as you can see, are very helpful in packaging much of the functionality needed in implementing your drag and drop feature. Let's go back to looking at a bit of code that's implementing the drag and drop. Here's the display array. And I just want to point out a couple of the methods being used. In the drag enter here, we are specifying if the drag source is null, in other words, the drag source where this object, this drag and drop object is coming from has not been identified as the left or right side, then we're going to set the operation to null, and that in effect denies the drop, so that something outside of our left or right array cannot be dropped into this particular left side array. We also see the use of drop internal. Here in our onDrop interactive block, we can see that if the drag source is set to left, in other words, we are in the left array, display array, and we want to drop this left dragged object into the left side, reordering, for example, we're going to call drop internal. And drop internal, again, is simply provides the functionality for performing that built-in drop for you. Another one I can see here is the get location row, and I can identify that these are drag and drop methods by the DND identifier. And if we look at the top of our code, we'll see DND as defined as a UI drag drop object. So down here on get location row, here what we're doing is identifying the drop index as the location row. So we want to know where is the user hovering to make this drop. That way we can insert the row at that position into the dialog, and we can delete the row from the other array based on the drag index of the other list. So getLocationRow provides some handy information as well. So this gives you a sense of how the various interaction blocks combined with the use of these drag and drop methods allow you to very simply implement the drag and drop feature.